My name is Daniel, and I'm 45 years old. I live in a small town in Central America where my family and I work as farmers. I'm married to Maria, a kind hearted woman who has always been my anchor. We have two children, Alex and Sarah, both 12 years old. They're full of energy and dreams, and I find myself constantly thinking about their future. We live on a modest farm, growing grains, vegetables, and some fruit. It's not the biggest or most profitable farm, but it's ours, and it's been enough to keep us going. I never thought much about the bigger picture in life. My days were filled with routine tasks, checking on the crops, fixing fences, and spending weekends with the family. Sundays were always special, as we'd gather around the table for meals and talk about our week. My life was simple, nothing extraordinary. I loved my work, and I was proud to provide for my family. But I also knew it wasn't always easy. The market prices were volatile, and sometimes it felt like no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't stay ahead. The weather had been unpredictable, and I could feel it weighing on me. It had been dry for months, and the crops were suffering. Then, just when we thought we might recover, a heavy rainstorm hit. But it wasn't just any rainstorm, it was torrential, overwhelming. It felt as though the sky itself was breaking apart. It rained nonstop for days, and the soil was saturated. Our farm began to flood. The river swelled with water, and the small creek by our land, which I had often crossed with Alex and Sarah, became a wild, raging torrent. The rain wasn't the only thing that bothered me. I had this sinking feeling, this gnawing anxiety that something was coming. I couldn't shake it. It was like the earth itself was restless, and I, too, was restless. I found myself staying up at night, worrying about the future. Would we be able to make it through another season of failed crops? Would I be able to feed my family? Could we afford to repair the damage from the storm? These thoughts kept me awake, racing through my mind, stealing the peace that I had once felt. Maria noticed my stress. She'd ask if I was okay, but I didn't know how to explain it. There were times when I would tell her not to worry, that everything would be fine, but deep down I wasn't sure. It felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. Even my children, who used to be full of energy and laughter, seemed quieter, sensing the tension in the air. And the longer this unusual weather persisted, the more I feared for our future. As the rain continued, our life began to change in ways we couldn't control. I started receiving calls from the government and neighboring farmers, all warning about potential flooding. The forecast didn't look good. Our land was already soaked, and the creek that had once been a peaceful, familiar place was now a dangerous, unpredictable force. I couldn't believe how quickly everything was shifting. A normal day of farm work had turned into a race against time. On one particularly stormy afternoon, I stood in the middle of the field, looking at the swollen creek. The sound of rushing water was deafening, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The sky was dark and threatening, and I thought about the days when things felt simpler, when we were just another family working the land without the constant fear of losing it all. I thought about how, just a few years ago, we had big plans to expand our farm, dreams of better irrigation systems and new equipment. But now it seemed so distant, like it belonged to another time, a time before the storm started. Maria and I tried to stay positive, but it was hard. We knew that the coming days would test us, and it wasn't just the storm. It was everything, the uncertainty of the crops, the mounting financial pressure, the stress on the kids. And even when the rain finally stopped, there was still the constant worry about how to recover from the damage that had already been done. I had no idea how to tell Maria the truth, that I wasn't sure we would make it through this. I prayed, and I prayed hard. I'd always considered myself a man of faith, but now my prayers felt more desperate, as though I was reaching out to God not just for guidance, but for help. I began asking Him to show me a way, to give me a sign that we would be okay. The rain kept falling, but inside me, a storm had started to build. It wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about something deeper, something that had started to unravel in my mind. Could I protect my family? Could I do enough to keep them safe and fed? Would we survive this crisis, or was it just the beginning of something worse? Every day I went to bed, wondering if the next day would bring more rain, more destruction. It wasn't just the immediate threat of the flood that had my heart racing, it was the feeling that something more was coming. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, unable to see what lay ahead, but knowing deep down that whatever came next would change everything. In the midst of this turmoil, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of helplessness, and that was the hardest part. Despite everything I had worked for, all my effort, my sweat, my sacrifices, I felt powerless in the face of forces beyond my control. It was in those moments, lying awake at night, when I wondered if there was something I was missing, something I had overlooked, something that could help us get through this. But I didn't know what it was, and that uncertainty was eating me alive. That night, as the storm howled outside and I lay wide awake, I thought about everything: my family, the farm, the future. I thought about the simple joys of life before the chaos, the sound of children laughing, the warmth of Maria's cooking, the quiet satisfaction of watching a crop grow strong and healthy. And I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever feel that sense of peace again. The storm that day came with a ferocity that caught us all off guard. We had been hearing warnings for days. The weather reports, the phone calls from neighbors, the local authorities, but nothing could have prepared us for the sheer violence of what we were about to experience. The sky turned an angry shade of gray, heavy clouds swirling in the sky like a storm was about to burst. The wind picked up, and soon it felt like the earth itself was trembling. I had heard about storms like this, but I had never imagined I would be in the middle of one. Maria and I had just finished securing the last of the tools in the barn when the wind started howling through the trees. We could hear the sound of the creek roaring louder than I'd ever heard before. Alex and Sarah, wide-eyed with fear, stood by the door, looking out at the rising floodwaters that had already begun to swallow the lower part of the field. I grabbed their hands, trying to calm them down, but I could feel the panic rising in my chest. There was no way we could leave the farm now. The road was already impassable. I told Maria to get the emergency supplies: water, food, flashlights, blankets. She moved quickly, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The rain had been relentless, and it felt as though the whole world was drowning under the weight of it. I had hoped for a miracle, but deep down, I knew we were running out of time. The water was rising fast, inch by inch, threatening to swallow everything in its path. I rushed outside, trying to assess the damage. The wind whipped around me, and the rain cut into my skin like needles. The creek had already breached its banks, sending torrents of water into the field. The soil, once rich and fertile, had turned to mud, and I could see debris, branches, stones, old tires, carried by the current, floating down like forgotten pieces of the world. It was surreal. I stood there for a moment, my boots sinking into the mud, trying to process everything: the farm, the crops, the life I had worked so hard for. It was all being washed away. A sudden crash shook me from my thoughts. I looked up, and my heart dropped into my stomach. The old barn, where we stored most of our equipment, was collapsing under the weight of the water. The roof buckled, and a wall caved in, sending more debris into the already churning water. I couldn't let it happen. Not the barn. Not everything I had worked for. I ran toward the barn, shouting for Maria to stay inside. But when I reached it, the water had already surrounded the structure. It was too late to save anything. I could only watch as the barn was consumed by the flood, its walls buckling and groaning as if the very ground was swallowing it whole. My heart felt heavy in my chest. It was as though I could feel every loss: the equipment, the supplies, everything that had been our livelihood. Gone in an instant. By the time I made it back to the house, the water was already at the doorstep. The wind had become a violent roar, and I could see the trees swaying dangerously. The children were huddled together, and Maria was holding them close. We could hear the sound of the truck's engine trying to start. It was Brandon, one of the neighbors, who had come to help us evacuate. He had always been a good friend, and in that moment I felt a surge of gratitude. But the relief was short-lived. As I stood in the doorway, trying to get my bearings, the first wave hit. It came with such force that it shattered the window of the living room, sending shards of glass flying through the air. I was knocked off my feet by the power of the water, which seemed to come out of nowhere. The cold of it took my breath away, and for a moment I couldn't move. The pressure of the water pushing against me was like being trapped under a massive weight. I gasped for air, but there was none. I struggled to get up, but my legs felt weak, and the current was pulling me under. All I could hear was the deafening roar of the water, the crashing of debris around me, and the frantic calls of my family. I fought, I kicked, but I couldn't seem to break free. My lungs burned, and I felt like I was drowning. In that moment, I thought of Maria, of Alex and Sarah. I saw their faces in my mind, their expressions filled with fear and worry. I whispered a prayer, but it felt weak. Please, God, protect them. Protect my family, I begged. That was the last thing I remember before everything went black. I don't know how much time passed, but when I regained some sense of awareness, I realized I wasn't in the water anymore. I wasn't even in my body. I felt light, weightless. And though everything around me was a blur, I was not afraid. I wasn't drowning anymore. The panic, the terror, the confusion, it all seemed to fade into the background. I felt calm, almost as though I had been placed in a place of pure peace. The next moment, I saw my house. It was submerged in the floodwaters, its roof barely visible above the rising tide. And then I saw them, Maria, Alex, and Sarah, clinging to the roof of their truck, screaming my name. My heart broke at the sound of their voices, but strangely, I didn't feel the ache in my chest. I was separated from them by something I couldn't explain, yet I felt no sorrow, only an overwhelming sense of peace. It was as if I was being held in a place of understanding, where everything was going to be okay. It didn't make sense, but I felt that everything was, somehow, as it should be, but I couldn't stay there. I tried to call out to them, to tell them I was okay, but I couldn't make a sound. I had no voice, no body. I was only awareness, watching, waiting. The moment I realized I wasn't in my body anymore, a strange sense of detachment overwhelmed me. It was as if I had been lifted out of my physical self, floating weightlessly in a space that defied logic. There was no pain, no confusion, no panic, only peace and intense calmness that filled my being completely. It was like being suspended in time, where everything I had known ceased to matter. I had no body to anchor me, but I didn't need one. I felt light, as though the very air around me was lifting me up. The world around me was shifting, swirling in a gentle fog, a soft gray mist that wasn't unsettling, but enveloping, like I was cradled in the arms of something far greater than myself. I looked around, trying to understand what was happening, but there was no time to make sense of it. The landscape around me was unfamiliar, and yet it felt safe, almost comforting. It was a space of quiet, not empty silence, but full of warmth, love, and something beyond human understanding. I wasn't afraid. There was no fear, no dread, only a deep sense of surrender to this moment. I felt as if I was being guided, led somewhere, but I didn't know where. As I floated in this strange place, my attention was drawn to something ahead of me. A figure appeared through the mist, coming toward me. At first, it was just a silhouette, but as it grew closer, I could see the light around it becoming more defined. The figure was tall, standing with an aura of light that seemed to emanate from within. His robes shimmered with the same soft glow that filled the space around us. His face, though gentle, was filled with an understanding that reached deep into my soul. His eyes, those eyes, I will never forget. They weren't just eyes, they were the essence of everything. It was as if, with one look, he knew me completely, not just in the way that a person might know someone from the surface, but in the way that God knows his children. Every part of me, every joy, every sorrow, every fear. every secret. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a deep, unfathomable love. When he spoke, I was overcome with emotion. His voice wasn't a sound that traveled through the air. It was a feeling that blossomed inside my chest. It was warm, kind, and more beautiful than anything I had ever heard. His voice reached into me, bypassing my mind and going straight to my heart. Daniel, he said, and hearing my name from his lips felt like a song, a melody that resonated through my very being. I have been waiting for you. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there in awe of him, of this place, of the inexplicable love that enveloped me. The words I had been longing to say, the questions I had been asking in my heart, all seemed irrelevant. They seemed small in the presence of this vast love. I wanted to say something, but all I could do was cry. Not tears of sadness, but of release, of relief. For the first time, I felt seen, truly seen, in a way I had never experienced before. It was as though the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders and I was free, free from fear, from pain, from the worry that had burdened me throughout my life. I wanted to ask so many things. I wanted to understand why this was happening to me, why I was here, what it all meant. But as I tried to speak, the words didn't come. Instead, I felt something deeper, something more profound than any question I could ask. I felt the presence of unconditional love. It was not just love in a sentimental sense, but love that transcended everything I had ever known. It was a love that made me feel whole, made me feel like I belonged in a way I had never understood before. As I stood there, floating, enveloped in his presence, I realized that this wasn't just some fleeting moment. It was something eternal. I was in the presence of truth, of life itself. I wasn't sure what it meant or why I was here, but I knew deep down that this was where I was meant to be. There were no questions of what came next, no concerns about what I had left behind. All that mattered was the love and peace that I was experiencing. I looked around, not sure where this place was. It didn't feel like the earth. It didn't feel like anything I knew. There were no buildings, no landmarks, no familiar surroundings. But it wasn't an absence of things. It was more like a perfect stillness, a balance between everything that is, a place where the noise of the world couldn't touch me. It was calm, so incredibly calm that it felt like time itself had paused. I felt like I had stepped outside of it, outside of time, outside of everything that had ever troubled me. Here, I was simply being. The figure, the one who was now clearly Jesus, extended his hand toward me. I don't know why, but in that moment I knew that this was not a simple gesture. It wasn't just a hand reaching out to help me stand. It was an invitation to come closer, to step into something greater than myself. His gaze softened as he spoke again. "Your life on earth is over, Daniel," he said, but his voice didn't sound like a finality. It wasn't cold or distant. It wasn't about the end of something, but rather the beginning of something far more profound. But you are more alive now than you've ever been. I felt his words resonate within me, deep in my spirit. I wasn't sure what it all meant, but I understood one thing. This was not the end. This was a new beginning, and everything I had known before seemed distant and irrelevant in comparison to what lay before me. Suddenly, the scene around us shifted. The soft gray mist began to part, almost like a curtain being pulled back. I felt myself being pulled forward, drawn toward a brilliant light in the distance. It wasn't a harsh light, not blinding, but a light that felt alive, full of warmth, of love. It beckoned me, and I wanted to go there. I knew in my soul that this was where I was meant to be, and in that moment I could not resist. Jesus continued to watch me, his presence radiating peace and understanding. I felt like I was being led into a greater understanding of myself and of the world. The questions I had carried all my life began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of knowing, of clarity, of truth. I reached out to him, and the moment our hands met, everything changed. I felt the bond between us, the connection that transcended space and time. There was nothing left but love, the purest, most powerful love I could ever imagine. And in that moment, I understood. I understood that there was no need for fear, no need for worry. All that mattered was the love we share, the love that is greater than anything else in this world, the love that, in this place, is all encompassing, all knowing, and eternal. As I stood there in the presence of Jesus, the overwhelming sense of peace I had been experiencing deepened, and the realization that this was a moment beyond time or place settled into my heart. I had always believed in God, but never had I felt his presence so tangibly, so intensely. The light surrounding him was not just the brilliance of a physical glow, it was the light of truth, of understanding, of pure and unconditional love. I could feel the weight of everything that had ever troubled me fall away, as though all the burdens I had carried in my life were suddenly lifted. This place was not bound by the rules of the world I had known. It existed outside of space and time, and in it, I was free. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but no words came. I didn't need to ask because deep within me, I knew that I was already beginning to understand things in a way I never had before. I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that I had been brought here for a reason. This wasn't just some chance encounter. I was being shown something, something far greater than I had ever understood about life, about the world, about the future. Jesus stood beside me, his presence radiating with an intensity that went beyond anything I could comprehend. He didn't need to say much. I could feel his understanding of everything, the depths of his knowledge. And in his silence, he began to show me what I needed to see. He extended his hand and, with a simple gesture, motioned to the space around us. The mist began to thin even more, and in the distance, I saw what looked like a vast landscape. But this wasn't a typical landscape. It wasn't a view of fields or cities or mountains. What I saw was the earth, but not in the way I had ever seen it before. I could see the world from a higher perspective, as though I was seeing it as God sees it. The vision was clear, and yet, as I looked closer, I realized it was more than just a physical view of the planet. It was a spiritual view. I saw the pulse of life, the energy of people, but also the unseen darkness that seemed to be choking it. It was like a fog, a heavy, oppressive mist that hovered over the world, blocking out the light. This is what you must understand, Daniel. Jesus' voice echoed, not in my ears, but in my very soul. The world is caught in a battle, a spiritual battle that many do not even realize is happening. The darkness you see is not just the absence of light. It is the work of the enemy who seeks to cloud the hearts of men and turn them away from truth. I watched as the darkness swirled around the cities, creeping over the land like an insidious fog. It wasn't just a physical darkness, it was something much deeper. It was fear, division, and pride. It was the noise of the world, the constant distraction, the anger, the hatred, the pride that fueled conflict between nations, families, and individuals. I saw it in the way people lived, the way they interacted, how they were consumed by the things of this world. I saw the struggles of families, parents lost in their phones, children glued to screens, isolated from one another. The world had become disconnected. People, all of them, were hungry for connection, yet they had lost the ability to truly connect with one another. The image was heartbreaking, but at the same time, I understood. This was the enemy's work. It wasn't just about war or violence. It was about division, about distraction, about tearing apart the very fabric of human relationships and causing people to lose sight of what truly mattered. Jesus' eyes were filled with compassion as he continued. The enemy has worked tirelessly to create divisions between my children. He has built walls of fear and pride, walls that separate people from each other and from me. But there is a way to break these walls, Daniel. There is a way to change this, to heal this world. It begins with my people. The vision shifted, and I saw the people I had always known, my family, my friends, and even strangers, lost in their own worlds, consumed by distractions, fears, and frustrations. But there were others too, people whose hearts were open, whose souls were searching for something greater than themselves. Jesus pointed to them. "These are my faithful ones," he said. "They are the ones who stand between the world and complete destruction. Their prayers, their faith are holding back the darkness. They are the light that is pushing back the enemy's grip on this world." I watched as these people, small in number but powerful in spirit, prayed. Their prayers were simple, but full of sincerity. They were not ornate or impressive. They were raw, real, desperate prayers for mercy and healing. And as they prayed, I saw the light around them grow. It was a golden, brilliant light that pushed against the darkness, slowly but surely pushing it back. With each prayer, the darkness seemed to recede, even just a little. But I could feel the power in each prayer, in each moment of true faith and connection with God. "The enemy has worked for centuries to deceive my children," Jesus continued, his voice full of sorrow. "But even in this time, there is hope. There is always hope. My people have the power to change the world, not with weapons or armies, but with faith, with prayer, with love." I felt a stirring deep within me, a call to action. But I was only one person. How could I make a difference? How could anyone make a difference in the face of such overwhelming darkness? Jesus looked at me, and for the first time I felt the weight of his gaze, the weight of his responsibility and his love. "You are not alone, Daniel. I am with you. You must go back. You must tell others what you have seen. Tell them to pray. Tell them to believe. Tell them to love." The vision shifted again, and I saw the future. It wasn't clear, but it was unmistakable. The world was headed toward a great shaking, a time of hardship. I saw fires, destruction, and war. But I also saw something else. I saw people turning back to faith, to prayer, to God. I saw them coming together, not to fight, but to pray, to worship, to seek God's guidance. And through their prayers, the light grew stronger. The darkness was pushed back, little by little, as people chose love over fear, unity over division, faith over pride. "The time is coming, Daniel," Jesus said, his voice filled with authority. "A time of trial, but also a time of awakening. This is the time for my children to rise, to be the light, to bring my love and truth into the world. And you, Daniel, will be a part of it. You will show others the way." The peace that filled me in that moment was indescribable. I knew my mission, even though it seemed impossible. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about fighting the world with my strength. It was about fighting with my faith. It was about showing people the way to true peace, true connection, and true love. And then as the light continued to grow, the vision began to fade. But I knew, deep in my heart, that this was just the beginning. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far greater than I had ever understood. The next moment, the profound peace I had been enveloped in began to fade. I felt the sensation of being drawn away from the brilliant light, like being pulled back through the soft mist. The light itself didn't disappear, but it receded, as if the curtain that had been drawn open was slowly closing again. It wasn't a violent sensation. It was gentle, almost tender, like the parting of a dream. But the peace that had filled me so completely was now replaced by a deep, sorrowful longing. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave the light, the love, and the overwhelming sense of clarity that had washed over me. I wanted to stay where everything made sense, where there was no confusion, no fear, no darkness. But as I was pulled away, I could feel the weight of my body coming back into focus. It was like 1,000 burdens suddenly descended upon me all at once. I was aware of the pain in my chest, the cold, the burning in my lungs, the warmth of the light, the loving embrace that had held me was no longer there. I was surrounded by something else now, a harsh, jarring reality. I could feel myself slipping, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was ready to return to the world I had just left. But I knew, deep inside, that I had no choice. I couldn't stay in the place of peace forever. My time wasn't up. I had more to do. As the light dimmed, I became aware of the world around me again. The weight of it pressed down on me like 1,000 stones. The air was cold, thick with the taste of fear and uncertainty. My lungs burned as I gasped for air, the coughing shaking my body violently. I was aware of sounds, muffled voices, the rush of movement around me, and the blaring of something that sounded like an alarm. I tried to open my eyes, but everything was blurred. The heaviness in my chest made it almost impossible to breathe. I realized that I was no longer weightless. I was in my body again, but it felt foreign, uncomfortable, and heavy. Then suddenly I heard a voice that didn't come from the physical world, but from deep within my spirit. Daniel, wake up. It wasn't a command. It wasn't urgent or demanding. It was soft, filled with love, yet filled with a strength that made me listen. It wasn't the voice of the person I had left behind, but the voice of someone who had known me before I ever existed, before I ever took breath. I knew who it was. Jesus, I whispered through the fog in my mind, though the words barely escaped my lips. You are not alone, Daniel, his voice said again. And as the words echoed in my mind, I felt something stir inside of me. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I knew that I was being called to rise, to wake up, to return. The cold metal of the world pressed down on me as I felt the heaviness of my body once again. My heart was racing, and I could hear the sound of machines whirring, the beeping of a monitor that tracked my every breath. My body, though weak, felt strangely familiar, like an old coat I had forgotten about, but had now been forced to wear again. The pain, the weight of it was overwhelming, but somehow I knew that I was being given another chance. I was back, but I wasn't the same. I had seen things. I had experienced something far beyond the physical world. I had felt the love of God in a way that no words could fully capture, and I knew that I was now a messenger. I had been shown something greater than myself, and I could not ignore it. As I began to regain more of my senses, I realized I was in a hospital. The sounds around me grew clearer. The beeping became more pronounced, the sound of shuffling footsteps, muffled voices, the sterile scent of medical equipment mixed with the familiar scent of rubber and antiseptic. I felt hands on my body, and for a moment I thought I was still caught in a dream. But no, this was real. This was the world I had left, the one I had fought to escape, but now it was different. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and tight. I could barely make a sound. The nurse beside me noticed and gently placed a hand on my arm. Her voice was calm and reassuring. Daniel, you're awake. You've been through a lot. You're safe now. She said it, but I wasn't sure if she believed it herself. I had been clinically dead for 20 minutes, according to the doctors, and now I was here alive. And I knew that my life, or rather my existence, had changed in ways I couldn't yet fully explain. But I didn't need to explain it to anyone right now. I knew what had happened to me. I had seen things no one could have described, no words could have prepared me for. I had glimpsed the truth of the universe, the truth of God's love, and I had been sent back. I had been shown a purpose, and that purpose was not to simply live out my days in quiet resignation. I was here for a reason, and that reason was far bigger than anything I had ever imagined. As the days passed and I recovered, I tried to process what had happened to me. My body slowly regained strength, though I still felt disconnected from it in a way. The sense of peace I had known in that other realm, with Jesus, was still within me. It had not left. even as the world around me returned to its noisy, chaotic rhythm. The contrast between the peace I had experienced and the world I had been thrust back into was jarring. The world was full of distractions, noise, and tension. The struggles of daily life, the bills, the obligations, the constant worry, all seemed insignificant compared to what I had seen. I had come back for a purpose. I knew that now. I had been shown the darkness that clouded this world, the fear, the division, and the distractions that kept people from seeing the truth. But I had also seen the light, the love that could pierce through the darkness. It was prayer. It was faith. It was the love of God that could change everything. I was no longer just a farmer, a man with concerns about crops and bills. I was a witness to the truth, a messenger. And though it terrified me to think about sharing my experience with others, who would believe me? I knew I couldn't ignore it. The love, the peace, the truth I had experienced needed to be shared. My family came to visit me the day after I woke up. Maria, Alex, and Sarah were by my bedside, their faces filled with relief and concern. Maria's eyes were red from crying, but when she saw me awake, she smiled. Alex and Sarah clung to me, their tiny hands holding mine tightly. I felt their warmth, their love, and it reminded me of everything I had fought for. But in my heart, I also felt the call to share with them what I had learned, what I had seen. Dad, Alex whispered, looking up at me with wide eyes. We thought we lost you. We thought you were gone. I kissed him on the forehead. I'm here, I said softly. I'm here and I'm not the same. And it was true, I wasn't the same. I had been through something that had transformed me, that had given me a new perspective on life. The world, with all its noise and distractions, wasn't where I was meant to focus. The love of God, the peace of His presence, that was what mattered. As I sat with my family, I knew that I was being sent back not just to live, but to share this message with the world. The enemy had worked hard to divide, to distract, and to keep people from seeing the truth. But I had seen the light, and now it was my turn to help others see it too. My life had a purpose, and that purpose was to bring others to the same peace I had found. And though I didn't yet know how to explain it all, I knew one thing for certain: I would never be the same again. As the days passed, I tried to settle back into a semblance of normal life. It wasn't easy. The hospital bed had felt like a distant memory, but the words I had heard there, the experiences I had encountered, lingered in my soul, shaping every thought, every breath. I knew deep down that what had happened to me was not just an accident or some unexplained event. It was a calling. It was a mission I was only beginning to understand, but one that filled me with a sense of urgency, a drive I had never felt before. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face of Jesus. Every time I thought about my family, about the people I loved, I felt the weight of what I had learned. I had seen the truth. I had seen the darkness that covered the world and the light that could break through it. But how could I share this? How could I explain to my family, to my friends, to anyone what I had experienced? Who would believe me? Who would understand? The world I had returned to seemed so different. It was filled with distractions, with noise, with a kind of frantic energy that pulled everyone in every direction, keeping them too busy to notice what was truly happening. The love, the peace, the overwhelming light I had felt in that place. It seemed so far removed from the world I was back in. It was almost as if people were living in a fog, unable to see clearly because they were so consumed by their daily struggles, their ambitions, their fears. I had been one of them. I had been too caught up in my own life to understand the bigger picture, to see what was truly important. But now everything had changed. I couldn't sit back and pretend I hadn't seen what I had seen. I couldn't ignore the truth that had been revealed to me, not after having felt that love, that peace, that overwhelming connection to God. My heart burned with a desire to share it, to tell others that there was more to life than what we saw around us. But the thought of speaking out terrified me. What if people thought I was crazy? What if they didn't believe me? What if they dismissed me as just another person having a strange experience? Maria could see that something was different. She had been so grateful, so relieved to see me awake, but she knew something had changed within me. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table with the kids, she looked at me with concern. Daniel, what's going on with you? You're not the same. You're so distant. What happened? I could feel her love, her worry, and for a moment, I didn't know how to explain it. How could I? How could I put into words the experience that had shaken me to my core? The vision, the peace, the truth I had been shown. How could I explain that? It wasn't something you could simply describe. It was a knowing, a feeling, a deep, spiritual truth that transcended language. But I knew I couldn't hide it from her. She deserved to know. I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice steady, but full of emotion. Maria, something happened to me. Something I can't explain, but I know it's real. I've seen things. Things about this world, about people, about God. And I can't just go back to living like I was before. I can't pretend like everything is the same. She looked at me, searching my face for the truth in my words. Her eyes were filled with concern, but also with a quiet understanding. She reached across the table and took my hand. Daniel, I don't know what you're talking about, but I know you. I know you wouldn't lie to me. Whatever happened to you, whatever you've seen, I'm with you. You're not alone. Her words were like a balm to my soul. I could feel the weight of her support, the strength of her love, and for the first time since I woke up, I felt that it might be possible to share this truth, to live this truth. I wasn't alone. I had Maria by my side. I had my family. I could do this. But as I thought about it, the responsibility of it all began to overwhelm me. I had seen glimpses of the future, of the struggles that lay ahead for humanity. I had seen the spiritual battle that was unfolding and the darkness that threatened to consume the world. But I had also seen the light, the love, the prayers, the faith that could push back against it. I had been shown the way forward, the way to salvation, to peace. But how could I make others see it? How could I help them understand what I had experienced? I couldn't just sit back and wait. I had to act, but I didn't know where to start. I felt so small, so insignificant compared to the vastness of what I had seen. What could one man do? What could I, just an ordinary person, do to change the course of the world? The thought seemed impossible. But then a quiet voice whispered in my mind, "It begins with one." It was the same voice I had heard when I first woke up, the voice of Jesus. And suddenly I understood. It didn't matter that I was just one person. One person could make a difference. One prayer, one act of faith, one moment of love. It could change everything. It all began with one, with me, with the decision to take the first step. And so I made a decision that night. I would no longer hide from the truth. I would no longer sit in silence. I would speak out, not for myself, but for those who needed to hear what I had seen, what I had learned. I would share the message of hope, of love, of salvation that I had been given. And I would start with my family. I would start by showing them what I had learned, helping them see the truth that I had seen. I would teach them to pray, to trust in God, to seek His love and guidance in every aspect of their lives. As the days went on, I began to talk to my friends, my neighbors, anyone who would listen. I told them about what I had seen, about the darkness and the light, the fear and the love. It wasn't easy, and many of them looked at me with confusion or disbelief. Some even laughed, calling it a strange dream or a delusion caused by trauma. But I didn't let their doubts stop me. I knew what I had seen. I knew the truth, and I would not be silent. Little by little, I began to see change. Some people began to listen. Some even began to pray, to seek out the same peace I had found. And in those moments, I felt a sense of purpose that I had never known before. This was why I had been brought back. This was my mission. This was my purpose. The world was filled with noise, with distractions, with fear. But I had been shown the way to peace. I had been given the tools to fight against the darkness, and I would not stop. No matter how hard it got, no matter how much I doubted myself, I would continue to share the truth I had learned, to fight for the love and the light that could save the world. It wasn't just a calling, it was a mission, and I would see it through no matter what.